You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
Hey, it's Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast here to tell you about Michelob Ultra Courtside. It's getting fans closer to the NBA with a chance to win prizes like courtside seats, a trip to All-Star Weekend, and much more. Check it out at MichelobUltra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra Superior Access, Courtside 24-25 sweepstakes, no purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 and up. Begins on October 1st, 2024. Ends July 1st, 2025. Multiple entry periods. Visit MichelobUltra.com/courtside for free entry deadlines, and official rules. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caveat, N2K Cyberwire's privacy, surveillance, law, and policy podcast. I'm Dave Bittner, and joining me is my co-host, Ben Yellen from the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security. Hey there, Ben.
Hello, Dave.
And on today's show, Ben and I are pleased to welcome back to our show my N2K Cyberwire colleague, Ethan Cook, the author of the Caveat newsletter. Ethan, welcome back.
Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, we're going to take a deep dive, as they say, into AI policy today. A quick reminder that while this show covers legal topics and Ben is a lawyer, the views expressed do not constitute legal advice. For official legal advice on any of the topics we cover, please contact your attorney. Hey everybody, Dave here. Have you ever wondered where your personal information is lurking online? Like many of you, I was concerned about my data being sold by data brokers. So I decided to try Delete Me. I have to say, Delete Me is a game changer. Within days of signing up, they started removing my personal information from hundreds of data brokers. I finally have peace of mind knowing my data privacy is protected. Delete Me's team does all the work for you with detailed reports, so you know exactly what's been done. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now at a special discount for our listeners. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/N2K and use promo code N2K at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/N2K and enter code N2K at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/N2K, code N2K. All right, we are back. And let me start off by saying that, Ethan, you have taken a really extensive look into AI regulations from coast to coast here in the U.S.
Yep. There's a lot.
Well, thanks for joining us, Ethan. We look forward to having you back. Yeah. So I guess part of me thanks you for having done it. Part of me thinks better you than me. Because
I'll
sure
second that.
Parts of it were a slog. But I mean, before we dig into the details here, what's the kind of the overarching impression that you have having gone through this exercise?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways you can look at the overarching view of AI legislation across America. But I think the way I would characterize it is patchwork. With there being no real substantial federal legislation to kind of guide states and companies on how to behave, each state has taken it upon themselves, or not in some instances, to regulate AI or what they feel is relevant in various degrees, creating this kind of weird framework where some states are really restrictive or attempting to be really restrictive on what can and cannot be done, and other states are focusing on very specific issues that may be relevant to them, and other states are choosing to really not regulate at all and kind of just let it go crazy.
Are the states, behaving in the way you would expect them to? In other words, I would imagine that California comes at this in a different way than Texas does.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the most unsurprising ones that I saw was Tennessee passing, or I should say, kind of more updating the Elvis Act, which basically prevents anyone from copying anyone's image, likeness, voice, etc., using AI to create deepfakes. And that's, kind of came in response for their music industry, which makes a lot of logical sense for that state. And then you have other states like Colorado, even Texas to a degree, passing some privacy laws or things along the lines regulating what can and cannot be done from an AI regulator perspective that have been really comprehensive in certain capacities. But I think the biggest thing that I've kind of noticed is while each state or most states have tried to do everything or try to pass some form of legislation to handle this completely evolving topic that changes almost daily, it feels, there hasn't really been a concerted, conscious effort as a state to really hit everything. It's kind of like we'll try and focus on deep fakes, or we're trying to focus on individual professions or privacy rather than the whole thing at once.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that here in Maryland working on AI-related legislation at the General Assembly. It's been that same patchwork approach. There have been legislation on deceptive deepfakes. There's been legislation proposed on election-related deepfakes. We had this separate scenario here that we're trying to develop legislation on for the use of deepfakes that leads to legal harm such as defamation. And then these sort of industry-specific regulations for industries that prevent a substantial risk, so critical infrastructure, healthcare, that sort of thing. I think that's really interesting, but I think kind of along the lines of what you're saying, it lacks a certain level of uniformity. On the one hand, I understand why states are reluctant to put together kind of broad AI policy through legislation. And we've seen the natural limits on that. And I know we'll talk about this in the California example, where the California legislature put together a pretty heavy-handed bill regulating artificial intelligence, and it was vetoed by Governor Newsom. Partially by being too heavy-handed. I know he had specific nitpicks. And I think it's incumbent upon states to start with some kind of common values, a very low common denominator. And for me, and I'm curious if you agree with this, that's governance. It's not necessarily what decisions need to be made vis-a-vis AI regulation, but who makes those decisions? How do we set up processes so that, especially, and you can start with the use of AI in government and state government and local governments. Come up with processes. Who decides whether a certain AI tool can be used to achieve a certain objective? And where does the oversight come from? What authority has that oversight body been given? I think those are questions we can start to answer now before we have this kind of patchwork of regulations in different sectors.
Yeah, I would agree that governance is almost critical to establish instantaneously. And I feel that if it's, I going through a lot of, different bills and different topics that people tried to regulate AI with, I think one thing that always stuck out in my mind was, how do you verify that these things are accurate, right? How do you verify that these impact assessments are being conducted the way they should be conducted? How do you verify all these things? And that kind of boils down to really strong governance and making sure that not only are companies doing what they say they're doing, but also we have a way to verify that. And, that age-old saying, trust but verify.
Right, right.
And make sure that these AI companies and, that the people reviewing processes, the way they're being, and not just developers, but deployers, are they being deployed in the way they should? Because a lot of, AI developers, they just put their, models out there and let people kind of go wild with what it is, and making sure that those processes are being, carried through by the deployer as well.
Right. I know some governments, I believe it was the state of Washington, looked into pre-clearance for the use of AI tools in state government, which is very ambitious. I think...
Is that like FDA approval for AI?
It's exactly what it would have been.
Yeah.
There's some type of state review process before the technology can be deployed, which is going to be cumbersome. And I think you might lose out on innovative uses of AI if you have this really cumbersome process. But yeah, I just think governance is an area where if we can at least establish that, and it would be great if there were uniformity among states on governance policies, at least generally who the decision-making bodies are. I think that would give companies a little bit more certainty. They know what the playing field is.
Yeah, and I think with the federal government, like, with NIST publishing its framework, kind of trying to establish that. It was an attempt to kind of lay the foundations, I guess the best way to describe it. But, with that being established, I don't really think there's been any, certainly not at the federal level, but at the state level, aside from, I would say, Colorado's AI Act, there's not really been any comprehensive effort led by a state that I can think of, at least off the top of my head, that has been pushing for that strong governance that you mentioned.
Yeah, and I really do think it's this vacuum that we've seen from federal leadership. I mean, NIST is well positioned to put out these guidelines, and they've done it across different sectors as long as they've been in existence. I think we're going into a period of more uncertainty, given that with the new administration, they've pulled back on a lot of non-binding guidance that we saw in the Biden years. So I think states had more of a blueprint to come up with governance policies based on what they saw from the previous administration. And now without that, I think they're kind of more in the dark because they always have to worry about preemption. If the federal government somehow does get their act together, the federal government can occupy the field in regulation of artificial intelligence and preempt state laws. And so I think states are wary of that. And they're also wary about companies, frankly, disliking state governments because they're using the heavy hand of regulation and that hurting the business climates in those individual states. So I think that's kind of the dynamic we're seeing out there right now.
Let me ask you this, Ben. Since you're involved, as you say, with helping some folks here in Maryland with some of these bits of legislation, is there a practicality at play here? In other words, some of the things that the states are coming at, are they doing that knowing full well that if the federal government is to come in and as you say, finally do something, these are the areas the feds are likely to be interested in. So we're going to try to avoid intersecting with that because, as you say, preemption is always an issue.
I've definitely seen a good deal of that. I think that's kind of 50% of the attitude. The other 50% is, look, if the federal government's not going to do anything, then it's incumbent upon us to develop policies. Like, we're not going to sit by and just let there be unfettered use of artificial intelligence in our state, especially from our state government agencies. And we can't afford to wait for federal guidance. So I think it's kind of those are the two predominant viewpoints. There's the reluctance to engage out of fear of preemption through federal legislation or regulation. And then there's this kind of defiant attitude that if the federal government isn't going to act, and it certainly seems like that's not going to happen anytime soon, then states have a responsibility to fill in those gaps.
Ethan, I'm curious from your research, if I'm a company, let's say I'm a social media company, a Facebook or an Twitter or, one of these big companies that has true global reach, and I'm faced with complying with this patchwork that's state to state. How am I coming at that? How am I approaching that from a practical point of view? Yeah, so I think there's two ways to tackle that, which is first looking domestically within the U.S. and then looking internationally. Talk about the first half of that. I think domestically it's about, for them, finding states that really work for them, which is why, normally we always think of California kind of as being that massive, a Silicon Valley, every tech company goes there, and that's still true. But we also think of it as this, major regulator. And I think, we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but to circle that back to this point, which is, they tried, California tried to pass a really comprehensive AI legislation bill. That was controversial, but, you did see some support from people like Anthropic who were kind of the mindset of, look, we need to regulate. We'd rather get something on the board than nothing on the board. And ultimately that bill was vetoed by Newsom, highlighting a lot of issues.
that he had with it, but he did end his statement kind of saying that we need that, even though he's vetoing this, that doesn't mean we shouldn't get AI legislation up. And they are considering a reversioning of that of SB 1047, which is the AI bill that official name of it. And they are, but I think with the reach that these companies have, and the massive emphasis that they have on both innovation and the potential for AI to unlock so many different opportunities, et cetera, I think there is a almost state's effort to bid for them to come. There's, I think, a large reason why SB 1047 was killed was because a lot of AI developers basically kind of hinted that if you're going to pass this bill and this comprehensive thing, then we're going to pull out and go somewhere else.
Right. Go to Texas.
I think exactly. And so given that, I think states kind of have to domestically walk a really fine line, and AI companies or people who are going to be deploying massive AI systems kind of have a lot of sway over states and what can and cannot be done. What do you guys think about that?
Well, let me jump in here and ask Ben. Ben, what do you see in terms of lobbyists?
Oh, it's intense. I mean, there are a lot of jobs at stake. And there's a lot of potential tax revenue at stake. We know a few things about AI. One, we know it's a fast-moving industry. We know that changes are coming about rather rapidly. And we also know that it takes a lot of data storage, which means there's a lot of discussion around these large storage facilities, at least prior to what we've seen with DeepSeek, where maybe we don't need the same type of data storage facilities that we thought we did. I think the combination of all of those is an opportunity for states to be at the forefront of the AI revolution. California managed to do it starting in the 1970s as it related to computing generally and all types of information technology, and built out Silicon Valley. And it worked because you had these economics of agglomeration. You create this kind of community there where everybody's a techie, and you move there. You can rotate between these businesses as employees. You establish it as kind of a intellectual hub of the development of new technologies. I think California is starting to, or at least is at risk of losing that competitive advantage due to a number of different factors. The cost of housing is one of them, but also the fear of heavy-handed regulation and also tax policy. And so other states have stepped forward. Texas is the big one in trying to be kind of the next Silicon Valley, which does bring a lot of economic benefits to the states. And I think that's exactly what lobbyists are telling legislators is you can pursue heavy-handed regulation, but you run the risk of picking up our toys and leaving. And that's going to hurt your tax revenue. And a lot of states are pretty strapped for cash right now. So I think that plays a major role. We've seen it in Maryland. I mean, we have a governor, a relatively liberal Democratic governor, who you would expect would be friendlier to regulation of risky business enterprise. But we also have a major tax revenue problem, and growth here has been stagnant, and our governor has been talking about the need to be more business friendly.
Right. Right. You see these economic development organizations, saying Maryland is open for business.
Is open for business. Yeah, exactly.
Right,
exactly.
Right. And every state says that.
And the reason that this is so relevant for AI is the potential. I know this is cliche. The potential is limitless. Like, this really could be the next multi-billion, trillion, whatever dollar industry. So there's a early movers advantage for the states that attract development in this area. And I think they're actively competing for it.
Yeah. Ethan, let me switch back to you here. I mean, we've already seen with the new administration, President Trump has rescinded former President Biden's AI executive orders. What seems to be the trajectory here of the new administration when it comes to this stuff?
I think one word summarizes it: deregulation. I think this administration, is very intent, and from day one, when it rescinded Biden's order, was emphasizing this strong message of we are not going to hamper AI innovation at any cost. They are going to deregulate, remove the barriers, and let companies pretty much, for lack of a better word, go wild with it. We just actually this week there was an AI summit in Paris, and JD Vance spoke there, and he continued that message. He said that not only do we need to have deregulation, but he kind of lambasted European regulators, saying that your regulations are what are keeping AI industry out of Europe. And if you want more AI innovation in Europe, you need to follow what the US is doing, and follow what China is doing, which is get rid of your regulations if you want to attract these businesses and these opportunities. So I would expect over the next 4 years that message to be pretty strong.
Yeah, I wasn't struck by JD Vance's message, which I think was something we all could have anticipated. They do have kind of a deregulatory lens, and I think, yes, that's standard Republican Party politics, but it's also influenced by some newly influential big tech leaders in the Republican Party, like Elon Musk and to a lesser extent Bezos and Zuckerberg, and really everybody who's taking a second look at Trump's Republican Party here, and also have an interest in deregulation. But really it was the reaction of the Europeans, who have this pretty heavy-handed AI regulatory policy that's scheduled to go into effect next year, basically saying, like, we might need to reverse course and take a far more deregulatory path, because we don't want to lose out to not only the United States, but China. And I think that's the DeepSeek factor here, where I think that product struck a lot of fear in Western entities who saw that they could build this extremely effective AI model. It's much cheaper and doesn't require as much computing power. And if any of us want to be competitive in this industry, then I think we have to kind of let the companies innovate as quickly as possible and not be hampered by regulations. I think that was kind of the surprising message, not from U.S. leaders, but from European leaders like Emmanuel Macron.
Yeah. All right, I tell you what, guys, we're going to take a quick break here for a word from our sponsor. We'll be right back after this. And now, a message from our sponsor, Zscaler, the leader in cloud security. Enterprises have spent billions of dollars on firewalls and VPNs, yet breaches continue to rise by an 18% year-over-year increase in ransomware attacks and a $75 million record payout in 2024. These traditional security tools expand your attack surface with public-facing IPs that are exploited by bad actors more easily than ever with AI tools. It's time to rethink your security. Zscaler Zero Trust plus AI stops attackers by hiding your attack surface, making apps and IPs invisible, eliminating lateral movement, connecting users only to specific apps, not the entire network, continuously verifying every request based on identity and context, simplifying security management with AI-powered automation, and detecting threats using AI to analyze over 500 billion daily transactions. Hackers can't attack what they can't see. Protect your organization with Zscaler Zero Trust and AI. Learn more at zscaler.com/security. Ethan, I'm curious, again, from your research here, despite the efforts from the states, are there major gaps in AI policy? Or are there issues that are urgent that are really haven't been addressed yet, in your view?
Yeah, I mean, ignoring the federal aspect of it and kind of, that kind of overarching blanket that I feel is pretty needed across the U.S., I would say some of the biggest things that are concerning for me that we haven't seen are comprehensive, and this goes to the governance aspect we talked about earlier, but transparency. How is AI operating? How is it making decisions? What data sets is it using to train, et cetera? And that feeds into this bias concern where, maybe the answers the model is giving is not necessarily wrong, but it's not really based on the data set it was trained with. But if you added in other data sets, other factors in, that changes the answer pretty significantly. And I would say the other thing that I think there's a pretty big concern about is we are innovating so fast, and these AI models have the ability to impact so much, as Ben said, limitless. What is the safety and cybersecurity aspect here? What is the role of cybersecurity? What is the role of privacy concerns with data and how these things are being used? Because so many people have the ability to deploy an AI model, and there are so many companies now making AI models. What does that look like? And how does that impact not just right now, but over the next 5 to 10 years when AI only becomes more proliferated?
There's also the practical problem. Like, we've tried to set up a governance framework in Maryland, which partially requires state agencies to do an inventory of AI systems that they're currently using. By the time they do that and their annual reporting requirements, like, the next thing is already here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So in the process of doing inventory and complying with all of these state-mandated requirements, you might be missing out on the next beneficial use of this technology. That's the nature of the beast. And that's not a value statement, because maybe it's really better to be safe than sorry and take this sort of slower, more methodical approach. But that's the risk that you're taking by having things like inventory requirements and even going as far as pre-approval of the use of AI tools in state government agencies. That's the risk that you take.
Are the states looking at labor markets in general? We hear about how AI is going to perhaps eliminate so many jobs. Are states trying to plan for that?
Yeah, I would say that is a huge concern, both amongst lawmakers as well as average citizens. There's a dynamic which has been kind of floated around and hasn't really, at least I haven't seen, really substantial impacts on this from a lawmaking perspective. That is emphasizing impact assessments on if we deploy this AI model, if we create this AI model, what's the impact on this specific job market? There's a lot of discussion about it, but I don't think there's anything that's been comprehensively done at this point, kind of leaving a significant gap in what could be impacted and what jobs could be impacted overnight, to be honest.
Yeah. There's always the kind of, we've seen this over the decades and I guess centuries, when a new technology comes along that improves productivity, the fantasy is always, and workers will be able to move on to more fulfilling jobs, But
it's always easier said than done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But it's not so easy to do from a practical point of view.
And people don't like that. I mean, I think that's something that is often overlooked, is like, people like what they're currently doing. There's a level of stability. There's a level of, I've been doing this work for 15, 20 years, and it's scary to me that a machine is going to take over and do my work for me. And I'm 60 years old and I don't want to go back to school and learn new skills. Those are all very, very valid things to think, in my view. And so from a policy perspective, I think we have to take all of that into consideration. Even if it potentially does hamper unfettered innovation, like displacement of jobs is a real factor. It affects real people. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly a very valid concern.
To what degree is the industry promoting self-regulation here, of saying, hey, we've got this, trust us?
That's a tricky one. Yeah, Ben, you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah, I actually think there was an encouraging effort, I'd say maybe about a year ago, of some of the major players in the space to get together and say, like, we are going to take regulation seriously. We should be putting together first principles on the boundaries on these systems, and let's do it together so that none of us lose a competitive advantage. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I feel like the momentum behind that effort of self-regulation has been lost a little bit. Maybe it's...
You don't know what happened?
I mean, I do know what happened.
I mean, there's kind of a big thing that happened.
Yeah, I think that's
President
a good way to
Trump got
describe
elected.
it.
Yeah.
that's how I would approach it. It was very convenient until it was no longer convenient.
It was 312 electoral votes.
Right, right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a part of it. Like, efforts at self-regulation, not more than a part of it, efforts at self-regulation are a preemptive measure to show policymakers that you don't need to be regulated by government entities, that you can solve all of these problems yourself. If the government, instead of threatening regulation, is saying things like, our primary goal is innovation, and we're going to get out of the way and let these companies carry this industry into the future, then they feel less of a need to prove to policymakers that they're willing to self-regulate. And that's really what it comes down to.
Ethan?
I think that echoes Sam Altman before the Paris AI Summit this week. Kind of emphasized, to Europe in this instance that, if you want growth, et cetera, you have to let builders build, I think was the line, and innovators innovate. Which to me was a pretty strong message saying, if you want us to come here, then you need to pull the gas pedal, hit the brake pedal on your regulations. And I think while these companies will always tell you that obviously they're about protecting people, et cetera, I think, look to California where the amount of money that was being thrown around there to impact that bill's passing, we'll say for a friendly term of it. I think that they're okay with regulation as long as the regulation is on their terms, and as long as it doesn't really impact their innovation and things along those lines. Given that that's now the federal government's take on this.
One thing I will say that's confusing to me that goes beyond a change in administration is there was a movement, even among the major players in the industry, of doomerism that, like, we have to get a handle on AI and stop it before it kills us all. Like, literally, we're going to wake up in 2026 and our machine overloads are going to destroy
it's Terminator.
us.
The Terminator, yeah.
Yeah, it is the Terminator scenario. Is it just me, or are we seeing way less of that? And, like, what has changed in the actual conditions that would justify abandoning that level of doomerism? So I'm just curious about that dynamic.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I've noticed that as well. I think, I've kind of played around with why that may be, and obviously there's probably some insider knowledge that none of us can predict. But I think there is a dynamic where first, competition has dramatically increased over the past couple of years. So I'm sure that has driven the element of, when OpenAI was the kind of at one point the only fighter in the ring. It's really good to say whatever you want to say and have that messaging. But now we have so many other companies popping up. I mean, DeepSeek has kind of upended everything. It feels like that. I think there's more emphasis on we need to stay innovative and ahead of these other companies rather than being able to kind of rest on the laurels of what we ideally fantasize about, like being, let's make sure we're not going too crazy with AI, et cetera. And I think there's another dynamic, which is, OpenAI, a kind of another untouched thing, which I think is not getting nearly as much attention as it probably deserves, is trying to become a for-profit company.
Right.
And that to me was a pretty big indicator that they are switching from a let's be passionate project, make an AI model from where they started to now let's try and make as much money off of this thing as possible.
Yeah, we're going to be held accountable by our shareholders.
Exactly.
Yep.
And I think that is another pretty big indication of why we're seeing this step away from self-regulation or more ephemeral regulation and kind of things along those lines where, it's as long as we're making profits still, it's okay. We don't need to do all the other aspects of it.
Well, before we wrap up here, I want to ask each of you, get each of you to answer individually. As we look into 2025 and beyond, I think even looking through, let's say, the rest of President Trump's term here, what do you suppose some of the major AI policy debates are going to be? What's going to dominate the conversation throughout this year and beyond? Can I start with you, Ben?
Sure. So a couple of things. Expanded use cases of AI for things like medicine, national security, these kind of instances or these use cases where a lot could potentially go wrong. It's very high risk, high reward. I think that's going to be a big area for debate. One thing I want to mention is this effort of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. They're going into government agencies, gaining access to personnel records and other systems, and trying to use AI tools to make substantive decisions for things like hiring and firing government employees and redirecting federal resources. So that's also a new use case. So I think we're going to see new debates around use cases. Are the consequences too big to rely on artificial intelligence for things like war and peace and national security and counterterrorism and fending off cyber attacks? I think that's going to be kind of the new vector for our debate here.
Ethan?
Yeah, I would definitely echo that national security aspect. I think given the current administration, I think national security is going to be a top priority for AI. I think the other thing that is going to become an increasingly important topic will be the aspect of privacy and what that role plays over the next couple of years. Over the past administration, there was a bipartisan effort to get a privacy bill passed, and I don't think that is going to die completely over the next 4 years. So I could see that being a pretty big aspect with how AI uses data sets and what data it's allowed to access and things along those lines.
All right. Well, we have really only scratched the surface here, and I want to encourage everyone to check out our policy deep dive here. It's The Future of AI Policy, written by Ethan Cook. It is over on our website, thecyberwire.com. If you search for the Caveat Show, you can find the Caveat newsletter as well. We hope you'll check it out and also subscribe to that. Ethan, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you with us here.
And thank you guys for having me. Great conversation.
Cyber threats are evolving every second, and staying ahead is more than just a challenge, it's a necessity. That's why we're thrilled to partner with ThreatLocker, the cybersecurity solution trusted by businesses worldwide. ThreatLocker is a full suite of solutions designed to give you total control, stopping unauthorized applications, securing sensitive data, and ensuring your organization runs smoothly and securely. Visit threatlocker.com today to see how a default deny approach can keep your company safe and compliant. That is Caveat, brought to you by N2K Cyberwire. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. Your feedback ensures we deliver the insights that keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. If you like our show, please share a rating and review in your favorite podcast app. Please also fill out the survey in the show notes or send an email to caveat@n2k.com. This episode is produced by Liz Stokes. Our executive producer is Jennifer Eiben. The show is mixed by Trey Hester. Peter Kilpie is our publisher. I'm Dave Bittner.
I'm Ben Yellen.
Thanks for listening.